Let's go ahead and check out our Movies app in a completed state so that you know that what you will be building in these sections. You can see that when the app actually starts, it gives you a text box so you can search for your movie. I'm going to go ahead and search for a movie called Batman. And now you can see all the Batman movies are being searched and are being displayed in your window. All of these movies are downloaded from the OMDB API, which we will go ahead and register in the next few lectures. If I click on any of the movie, if I select a movie, it will take me to a details screen, which is a separate request on the OMDB API, fetching the details and displaying the details. You can see that we are also using a rating control that we developed ourselves. This will be part of the project as a starter kit. We're displaying the poster and we're displaying the name of the movie as well as the plot. All of this is created using the Redux design pattern with SwiftUI. So let's just go ahead and get started. All right, so now that you have seen what we will be building in this section, let's go ahead and get started. The first step for you is to make sure that you are registered on omdbapi.com. This is the service, this is the website that we'll be using to get all the movies and get all the details of the movies. So make sure that you are registered on their website. It is very, very important that you get your API key from OMDB API, and without the API key, you will not be able to perform any request. So how do you get the API key? Well, let's go ahead and click on API key. And you can see that you can become a Patreon or you can get a free 1000 daily limit request. So type in your email, type in your name, the first name and the last name and the use. Inside the use, you can say that you are working on an iPhone app and then submit. Please make sure that it is going to take maybe 10 to 15 minutes for your API key to be generated, and you will receive your API key in your email. Once you have received your API key, you will be able to perform different kind of request. So let me go ahead and show you what it will actually look like. So this is one of the endpoints that we'll be using. You can see the URL, and I have removed my own API key, which you will replace with your API key. You can see that I'm passing in Batman, which means I'm actually searching for Batman movies, and this is the result that I get. It's in JSON format. It sends you the JSON object or the outer object, which contain search property, which is an array that we want. And each item that you are going to get contains the title, the year, IMDb ID, type, and even a poster. So you can even display really nice graphics and posters in your SwiftUI or UI kit application. But right now, the most important part for you is to go and register for an API key. You will get API key in your email in, let's say, 10-15 minutes. So make sure that you check it out. And then you will have to pass in your API key every single time you make a request. If you don't pass in your API key, well, it's not going to work. So go ahead to OMDB API and register to get your API key right now. Before we start, let's go ahead and check out the Movies app starter project. So I have added a starter project so that you will have some of the things you already need and we don't really have to implement it again and again. If you have been following this course, then you already know that we have implemented the store. And you can see that I'm adding all the code to create a store. I'm adding all the code for the middleware, for the state, for the reducer. You can see that we do have these protocols being built, same type with the same thing with the middleware and the reducer. Everything is just there. We have to implement the actual middleware, we have to implement the actual reducers, but you can see that we have some sort of a base setup already in place that we can utilize. Let's check out the models. Nothing there. I check out the extensions. We have a couple of extensions. You can see the view extension, which is embed in navigation view. We can call this view extension, and then it will automatically embed our view inside a navigation view. We have a string extension, which is to int and URL encode. This is going to be helpful if we are searching for movies and they have a space in between them. So this is going to allow us to URL encode them properly. We are also having a couple of different views. We have a URL image view. So this particular view is used to display an image. And we have a rating view, which is used to display a rating, like a star rating. If a movie is 10 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 or 5 out of 10. In the loaders folder, we have the image loader. So this will be used by our URL image to load the image. And in utility, we have constants, which contain URLs with their keys to the OMDB API. So I'm not going to open that one because it does have a key. So make sure that you have your own API key. All right. Apart from that, it's the same old store that you have been using. We have not really changed anything. You can see that we have also middlewares over here. If we go to our actual Redux file, you can see that we have not added a particular middleware because we have not created the movies middleware, which will be responsible for getting all the movies. We have also not added a web service or a model that we need to fetch or perform a network call, get a particular movie, and populate it in a model. So we don't really have those things. So we have kind of like a starting point of the application, but we don't have those missing pieces. And one of the missing pieces we're going to start with will be the actual web service, meaning a service that will call the API and that will get all the movies, and then we can populate the movies inside our models. So let's go ahead and get started with that in the next lecture. Now, before we jump on to the next video, I do want to talk about Azam Sharp School, which is one of the largest catalogs for iOS development. I mean, check out these courses. If you simply click on the courses, you'll get a list of 22 plus courses. All of these courses are extremely intricately created for you. They all have hands-on exercises. I mean, look at these courses over here. Test-driven development. You have server-driven UI, Swift Data Bootcamp, MV design pattern, full stack iOS development, reactive programming, and much more. Now, you can pay the individual price, as you can see, $69, $89, or what most people end up doing, they just become a pro member. They get access to everything, all 22 plus courses, 130 hours of content, and more. So the best route for you is to just become a pro and get access to everything. All right, so that's it. Check out azamsharp.school, and I'm sure you're going to love it. Now let's go back to the video. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is we need to implement our models, because looking at the result that we are getting, you can see that this is the thing that we're trying to capture, the actual result. But all of this result is inside or wrapped up inside another object. So let's see that how we can accommodate this kind of a hierarchy. And this will be a Swift model. So I'm going to go ahead and call this movie. And let's go ahead and create it. Okay, there we go. Now the first thing that I'm going to implement will be the model that will represent this particular item, the actual inner item. So obviously we will need to have property for title and year if you need year. We don't really care that much about the year, so I'm just going to go with title, IMDb ID, and poster so that we can see the picture of that particular model. All right. So let's go over here and we will say structure, movie, and we will create a property called title. We will create a property called poster, and we will go ahead and create a property called IMDB ID. Now, since we will be decoding it from JSON, so we're going to go ahead and put decodable. You can also go ahead and put codable, which means that this is encodable and decodable. But since we will not really be encoding it anyways, I mean, it's more of just getting the JSON, decoding it. So we're just going to decorate it with decodable. The other problem with this is that the names that I have given over here, the title, the poster, and IMDB ID, they don't really match the names of the properties that are over here. You can see the properties that are coming from JSON are all starting with a capital letter or uppercase. We can use the private keys or coding keys to accommodate that issue. So I'm just going to go ahead and create coding keys, which will be string, and it will be using the coding key protocol. And now I can say that the title property and the value that it will be mapped to will be the title. And the same thing with poster. It will be called poster. And finally, the IMDB ID will be mapped to, well, IMDB ID. And make sure that you have an IMDB ID property or field in your JSON. And we can actually see it's right over here. But all of this is inside another object. So we do have to create some sort of a parent object that contains the movie object. So I'm going to go ahead and create another structure, and I will call it movie response. This is also going to be decodable because we are decoding it from JSON. It will have a property called movies, which will be an array of movies. Now, one thing to keep in mind again is that there is no property called movies in the JSON that we are getting. The name of that property is search. So again, we will have to implement this coding keys protocol so that we can say that the movies belongs to or maps to the search. I'm going to go ahead and create enum, which will be coding keys, string, coding key, and then case for the movies, it will be search, because that is the key, that is the attribute or the property that we see right over here. And the value of that is this thing, which, or an array of all the movies. That is what we are actually doing over here. So this is how you will create a movie model, which comprises of the movie response and a individual movie model. So now that our models have been completed, we can actually move on to creating a web service, also known as a HTTP client, that is going to make a request to this particular URL along with the API key. So hopefully you already have the API key that you can substitute over here, get all of this data, and then map it and put it inside the array. So let's go ahead and see how we can do that in the next lecture. Okay, so our model is done. Now we can go ahead and move to implementing our web service. I'm going to go over here to the shared and add a new group. I will call it services. And inside services, I'm going to go ahead and add a new file, a Swift file, and I will call it a web service. This will be our HTTP client that is going to make a request to the OMDB API, going to fetch all the results and then populate our models. Now, I have done this quite a number of times in many different videos, so if you do want to skip this part, that is perfectly fine. Okay, so we'll start with the web service. And I'm going to go ahead and create a function. I will call this function get movie by. And since we are actually searching the movies, so that's why I'm just going to call it get movies by. And we are going to pass in the search parameter. We're going to pass in the completion. So this is the closure that is going to be fired once you fetch the movies. escaping because I'm going to be assigning it to something. And we're going to use the result type, which was introduced in Swift 4.2 or close to 4 somewhere. So in the result success, we expect this to return us a list of movies. And for the failure, we're just going to call it a network error. Now, what is this network error? This will be an enum that we are going to implement in a moment. Okay, so this is our definition of the function. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what the network error is. Network error is simply a very simple enum that is going to be using the error protocol, and it is telling us a bit about different kind of errors that can actually happen in the network, like a bad URL, decoding error, or just getting nothing back. Okay, so now let's go jump into get movies by, and we are going to get the movies URL. Movies URL equals to URL string, and now we can use constants dot URLs dot URL for the particular search. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in the actual search item, which is search. Else, well, if something bad happened and we are not able to form the URL, we're going to fire the completion, and we're going to say failure and bad URL, and go ahead and return it. Now all of this is implemented into constants.url.url by search. This is inside the utility folder, so you can always go and check it out. Once we have the movies URL, the next task would be to perform the request. So we are going to use URL session.shared.data task with URL, and we are going to use this one, which takes in the URL. I'm going to go ahead and pass in the movies URL, and going to pass in the completion handler. I like to use the trailing closures, so I'm just going to go ahead and use the trailing closures right here. Get the data, get the response, get the error, and call resume. Don't forget to call resume, or else your network request is not going to go through. Okay. Now we will go ahead and get the data. So this is the response that we receive in bytes and data. And if the error is equals to nil, then we will do something else. What can we do? We can just go ahead and say completion and failure. That means there is no data. Sometime maybe we don't get any data. In those cases, we're just going to fire completion, no data. If, however, we do get the data, then we want to decode it. So let's go ahead and do JSON decoder dot decode, and we are going to decode to movie response.self. So self basically means it's the type that we are decoding to, and the data that we are decoding is the data that we received. Now the JSON decoder can actually throw exceptions, so it is a throwable function, so we can call it with a try, with a do, try catch, try exclamation mark, meaning forcefully trying. I'm just going to use the try optional, which means if it fails, it's just going to go ahead and return nil to us. So movie response. Now once we get the movie response, I can go ahead and say movie response equals to movie response, and I can go ahead and fire completion, passing in the success and passing in the movies, which should be in the movies response. So I'll say movie response dot movies. Else something has gone wrong, we can go ahead and fire completion handler, and in this case we're going to fire failure and passing in the decoding error. This is how you will implement your get movies by function for the web service. This function is going to go and going to search for particular movies using the search parameter, and it is going to return you a list of movies which you have already seen that it will be in this particular format. Once we get all the JSON, we map this particular JSON into a movie response, and then we simply return the movies property of the movie response, which end up being a list of movies. Great. So now that we have created this web service, Let's go ahead and see that how would we use this web service. This will require us to create the middleware. This will require us to create the state in our Redux for SwiftUI, and that is exactly what we're going to do in the next section.